Welcome back, everybody. I'm sure everybody's been busy sewing and cutting, and we all have this interesting pile of blocks. They all have different pieces in different areas, and I'm only going to show you 3 of mine because otherwise I'd have my desk covered up here. So right now we can take a look right quick before I get too far. Is look at the edge of this one. It's all over the place. Look at huge edges right here. And this one here came in differently. You can see this. It's not too bad. And look at here, this one's darn good. And up here looks pretty good. We're not going to worry about that. So those of you that are panicking because something looks a little wacky, don't be concerned. I'm going to set those aside for the moment, and we're going to talk about the tools that we need to use for this project, for this side. I have my trusty rotary cutter. Yes, I'm using the 45mm this time. If you're still comfortable with your 60, go ahead and use your 60, but you do need a good sharp blade. And the best thing to use is a 9.5-inch ruler. We are cutting our blocks down to 8.5 inches, and the 9.5 inch just allows us to manipulate that a little bit better on how we're going to put this in here. Okay. Or you can use 2 6-inch wide rulers. I used my 2 6-inch by 12-inch rulers. For those of you who know me, I have just a few rulers in my stash. It's almost as bad as my fabric, I think. But I always seem to have extra rulers. So 2 6-inch will work just as well put together to make this trimming pretty easy. The other thing that we have really playing a good deal for us is that we don't have to try to look for a straight edge on this one, and this was totally unintentional when this happened. Excuse me, that frog is really creeping through my throat today. Right here, that particular line ended up right in the right position for us to use it as a straight edge. So I'm going to illustrate this to you. And I'm going to take a look at our instructions right quick so you can kind of follow along as to what I'm talking about. And I want each one of you to look at the instructions while I go through this. The drawings are a little confusing, not too bad once you see it done. I couldn't take photographs to put them into the instructions just for the fact nothing showed right. So I tried to do it in colored lines. So let's take a look at those. Okay, here we are on our instructions. If you look at the yellow line that I have kind of drawn in the middle of our block here, that is a representation of how we're going to cut an 8.5-inch square out of the middle of our blocks. Again, I will say this, not every block will be exactly the same. So again, you OCDs out there, just mellow, get yourself a good glass of wine. But just take it easy. This will come out looking pretty good. It's just not going to be mathematically absolutely correct. This is art. So you're going to cut your piece out of here. And again, we're going to use that one seam line that just by accident ended up being pretty straight. So that's going to be our reference point. So let's go back over to our actual block and get some cutting done. Okay, here we are. First thing we're going to think about is, okay, we've got our seams all nicely pressed. Looks like one of mine kind of rumpled over a little bit. But we want to make sure that they're pressed open. And remember, don't drag your iron. Press. And then once you've got everybody pressed, you can flip it over and then give it a good press this way. And that way everything stays nice and flat. It's a lot easier to handle your iron on these, especially where some of these little bubbles are, and your ruler doesn't do this rocky thing. Okay, first thing I'm going to demonstrate is how to use your 8.5 or your 9.5-inch ruler to make an 8.5-inch block. So I'm going to set my ruler down, and here is my 8.5 inches. What I should probably do, and show you how to do this at the same time, is if you have a hard time seeing that 8.5 inches, tape, wonderful tape. And don't leave it on too long. I will tell you why. I don't know how many of you can see this, but see all this mucky on my ruler here? That was tape that was left on too long. And I just haven't taken the time to clean it off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my tape and I'm going to tape my ruler just like so. And this is going to make it so that I have 8.5 inches. And just tear off the ends, nice and clean. And I can turn my ruler into an 8.5 inch ruler by doing this. Now again, I have 9.5, but I only need 8.5. So here I go, right along there. Right along that 8.5 inch line. So there we go. I just turned my 9.5 inch ruler into an 8.5 inch ruler. So this is the area inside here that I want to fit onto my block. And remember, I have a straight edge down here that I can use, oh that darn glare, that I can use on my block. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my ruler on here in such a way that I can see that it doesn't matter what line I use, as long as I have a line and I know that my inside of my block is coming in here. So I can line up this line, you can see where the color changes, right on that seam line. Now when we trim these blocks, we want to trim side, side, top, bottom, or vice versa, but make sure you do one side, other side, side, side. Don't trim in a circular fashion, because if you trim in a circular fashion, what happens, whatever area you've made here now continues around the corner, and when you get back over here, you will have a kitty wampus block. Let me tell you, here we go with that darn kitty wampus again. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to place my ruler in such a way that I can see that I'm covering all of those extra seams. And you can tell right here, remember I told you some of those edges are going to be really tiny, some of these are going to be quite excessive. But we want to make sure that we can trim as much of those edges off as possible without trimming excess from the other side. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim this side over here. We can see that little bitty edge peeking out. I'm going to take my rotary cutter and trim off that edge and remove it. I am only going to use this. Now this becomes my straight edge because I use that. I transferred straightness, if that's a word, to this edge. So far so good, I hope, everybody. Now what I'm going to do is I have to trim this side. So I'm going to rotate my block and I'm going to place my 8.5 inch line, which happens to be along the edge of the tape. And the way I taped it is that I can just see my yellow line on there. And this side, I don't have to worry about this way. I'm only worried about 8.5 inches this way. I hope that makes sense. I'll do it a couple of times so that everybody can understand that. So I'm measuring from here to there. And I've got enough of that has to all trim off there. So off that comes. So far so good. Now I have 8.5 inches this way. I need to make it 8.5 inches this way. So I'm going to rotate my block so that I can trim this side to this side. Now remember, oh, looks like that little seam under there is just going to give me a fit because it don't want to play nice. That's going to happen, people. All right. Here is my little block. I'm going to place my ruler on here so that I can still see that I have 8.5 inches. I'm going to look and see that I can place my 8.5 here and my 8.5 here. So I know that I'm not kittywampus. I'm using those edges as my straight edges to guide for these. I hope that's making sense. Because now I can cut. I have enough over here, and if I scooch this way, you can see I still have enough over there. So I've got quite a bit. So I want to try to center an 8.5 inch block. I'm trying not to get into the way of the camera here. Right like so. And I'm going to trim this edge. Now I can transfer that straight. I'm going to rotate over here. Here is my 8.5 inches. I'll line that up nice and square. I can check along here if I want to, because I've got a lot of ruler down here. I can go, okay, there it is, square across the top there. And I have a square line along here. And I can trim off this edge. Now, for those of you that are going, oh my gosh, that's all? That's right. This is all the waste you have after all that cutting, and you have an 8.5 inch square. By George. Now, doesn't that look cool? All right. So now we've done it with a ruler that is square. Let me grab another one here. And again, I'm going to check to make sure all my seams are nice and flat and open, because it just makes the fact that the rulers do not rock on these. Okay. This time I'm going to use 2 rulers. If for some reason you are having trouble, this is 6 inches, 7, 8.5. You can tape off this one as well, so that you only have that line for you. So here we go with our little magic blue tape. I'm going to tape my line just so that I can see where it is. Now I'm typing just a little bit off that line. I'm shortening my tape this time so you can see it a little better. Let's see. That would be the best way to show you this. Does that work? Not really. Oh well. I have 1, 2.5, and I've taped it so I can still see my 1/2 inch mark. But this is a guide that just tells me where to find it. So I can put these rulers down side by side and looky here. I've got, pick a line along my edge there. I scooch these up, everybody can see that pretty good. All right, I'm using my 3 inch line because I've got them both oriented in the same way. Here's my 3 inch line on the edge of that first straight line. And I'm far enough over the edge over here. I've got a little trimming over here. I know that that's going to be straight. I'm going to grab this and trim this side off. Now I'm going to take my 2 rulers. Now I try to keep this one as far as my left hand all the time. So I'm going to rotate my block, place this ruler down so that my 8.5 inch mark is right along that edge on this side, and that way I know how much to cut off over here, and this side are now perfectly parallel, and they're 8.5 inches apart. Hopefully that's making sense to everybody. And I'm going to trim this edge, my little skivvy pieces. Again, rotate my block. And this time again, I'm going to pretend like nothing happened there, because now I don't need to keep anything straight except for using my outside edges. And if I use my outside edges just like this, making sure that I have them straight here and straight up there, and I know that I have enough underneath here, I can go ahead and trim my right side of my block. Now, those of you who are lefties, Yeah, unfortunately I am ambidextrous, but not that talented with a rotary cutter with my left hand. And it would look kind of like a comedy show. So let's try not to do that, but just kind of think of things upside down. So I'm going to go ahead and trim off this edge. Now in some cases, yes, you're going to end up with a little bit extra. And I'm going to turn this around, making sure that my 8.5 inch mark is right where I want it, along the edge over here. Just like so. And I can trim this one so that it's perfectly parallel. And so far, see, look at here. 2 blocks, and that's all I have left from 10-inch squares. There we go, ladies and gentlemen. I haven't forgotten about you. So let's see what we're doing here, and then we'll go back. Thanks a lot. See you in a bit. Okay. I'm not sure if everybody caught that. I'm going to do one more block on trimming, but I'm not really going to do too much talking about our instructions, as I'm going to show you the easiest thing to do is just like I said, tape off your square, and then remember to kind of take a look if you have to. Now here's one of those blocks, and I'm kind of glad I've got several different styles. This one is very close to the edges. So we need to make sure that we have enough on our edges to trim. So what I'm going to do here with this one is do my little scooch up, again using my marking here. I just chose a line on my ruler that is going to go parallel right on top of that seam line, checking to make sure that I have enough left over here to cut and a left over here to trim, because our blocks will vary just because of the game of what they are. So there's my first cut, and I'm going to go ahead and trim this one off. Just like I did before, I'm going to rotate my block, put down my 8.5 inches, and you can see I have a little bit here, which is good. I'd rather have a little extra, making sure my 8.5 inches is right over here, and trim this side. There's another one. Rotate it one more time. And this time I'm using top and bottom, remember. And I need to make sure that I've got enough over here as over here, so I can kind of distribute it a little bit. It's the game of centering. And I'm doing parallel, remember, parallel sides. And I'm making sure that I have enough to go ahead and get all of my block in there, just like so. Because sometimes when, we've talked about this before, when we're putting them together, we get that little bit of kitty wampus in there, and you need to watch these outside edges, because every once in a while one will stick out a little bit more than the other. Check to see that the one that's sneaking underneath is going to be the one that's going to get trimmed, because you do not want to trim and then end up with that little piece stuck over there. So again, line yourself up, making sure you're clean here, here, and over here, and that way your last cut is perfectly 8.5 inches. So there we go. I've got 3 ready to go. 27 more to go. Well, I can do that while you guys go ahead and get the rest of yours cut, and then we will be seeing you in our next video on what you're going to do to lay out, create your sashings from your jelly rolls. Oh no, we're going to touch the jelly rolls. So get all your trimming done, and happy cutting, everybody. We'll see you in the next video. Ta-ta!